The evening was quiet, with a soft orange glow from the setting sun casting long shadows across the suburban streets. Cars hummed by occasionally, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass from the nearby lawns. A man was driving home after a long day at work, his mind still thinking about the emails he needed to reply to, and the simple dinner he planned to cook. He enjoyed these drives, the quiet moments that let him relax before stepping back into the world at home. As he rounded a gentle curve, a police car appeared behind him, its lights flashing suddenly. Startled, he slowed down and pulled over, heart beating faster than normal. He had obeyed all traffic rules, but something about the car and the way the officer approached made him uneasy. The officer stepped out quickly, moving toward the car with a level of aggression that seemed unnecessary for a simple traffic stop. He held his gun visibly in one hand while barking commands, telling the man to keep his hands where the officer could see them. The man's hand shot up instinctively. He stayed calm, speaking clearly and slowly, trying to avoid escalating the situation. "Officer, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going home," he said. The officer, however, seemed uninterested in listening. His eyes were sharp, scanning every inch of the car as if expecting some immediate threat. The man could feel the tension thick in the air, a strange mix of fear and disbelief. He had never felt so scrutinized in his life. The officer circled the car, peering inside. The man tried to remain as still as possible, careful not to make sudden movements. Every instinct told him to comply, but another part of him wondered why he was being treated this way. He had not done anything wrong, yet he felt the weight of suspicion pressed heavily upon him. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere in the distance, breaking the tense silence for just a moment. The man tried to steady his breathing, telling himself to stay calm. He knew that panicking would only make things worse. Slowly he spoke again, trying to explain himself. "I'm just heading home, officer. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer's face did not soften. He leaned slightly closer, his gun still visible, and asked sharply, "Do you have any idea why I pulled you over?" The man shook his head slowly, trying to keep his voice level. "No, officer. I really don't. I'm just driving home." The officer seemed annoyed, almost impatient. He demanded the man step out of the car, still keeping the gun ready. The man's mind raced. He wanted to comply, but he also knew that stepping out under these conditions could be risky. He weighed his options, deciding that staying calm and collected was the best way to avoid sudden danger. Slowly, he opened the car door and stepped out, hands raised, making sure his movements were clear and visible. The officer directed him to the side of the road, keeping the gun trained on him. Other cars passed by, their drivers glancing curiously at the scene. The man felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration, not for himself but for the fact that an ordinary drive home had turned into a moment of life-threatening tension. He had always been careful, always respectful of the law, yet here he was, treated as a threat simply for existing. As he stood there, the man tried to make small talk, hoping to humanize himself in the officer's eyes. He spoke about the quiet evening, the neighborhood, even mentioning the dog that had barked. The officer, however, seemed to have little patience for conversation. His eyes darted around, constantly checking for movement or signs of danger. Each second felt longer than the last, the tension mounting with every passing moment. The man's heart pounded, but he reminded himself to stay rational. He began thinking quickly, trying to find a way to ensure his safety without provoking further anger. He noticed the officer's radio and considered what might happen if he spoke calmly, showing he was not a threat. Yet he also knew that mere words might not be enough. He remembered stories he had read, situations where ordinary citizens had faced dangerous stops and survived by staying composed. He resolved to follow that principle. He kept his hands visible, moved slowly, and continued speaking in a calm, steady voice. "I'm not looking for trouble, officer. I just want to get home safely," he said. The officer's response was minimal, a nod that seemed more reflex than acknowledgement. Minutes passed like hours. The man felt the weight of every glance, every cautious movement the officer made. He noticed the officer occasionally glancing at his badge, muttering into the radio, but the man could not hear the conversation. All he could do was stand there, holding his position, trying to appear cooperative without making sudden gestures that could be misinterpreted. A few cars slowed as they passed, drivers curious but careful not to interfere. The man wondered how this moment would look to a passerby. How ordinary and yet extraordinary it must seem. He focused on breathing, on keeping his mind clear. He reminded himself that panic was the enemy, that composure might be his only shield in a situation that already felt dangerously unpredictable. He then noticed something on his phone, the ability to call for help, to alert someone to the severity of the situation without escalating it in the moment. His mind quickly calculated the safest approach. He needed to stay calm, to be factual, to show that he was not a threat but also prepared to protect himself if necessary. The idea of calling a higher authority, someone who could intervene and verify his safety, began forming in his mind. The officer shifted slightly, his eyes never leaving the man. His stance was rigid, his attention absolute. It became clear that the officer expected immediate compliance without question, and any hesitation could be dangerous. The man's intuition told him to move carefully, to follow instructions, and to make sure every action he took was visible and deliberate. The tension continued to build. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the hum of a passing car, seemed amplified. The man's senses were heightened, his mind alert, scanning for any potential threat while maintaining his own calm demeanor. He spoke again, slowly, carefully choosing words that conveyed cooperation. "I understand, officer. I want to follow your instructions. I am not armed, and I have nothing to hide." The officer's expression remained hard, almost unreadable, but he did not escalate further, giving the man a moment of slight relief. The man took a small, steadying breath, silently acknowledging that staying composed was working, at least for now. He realized that this moment could turn either way, calm resolution or sudden danger. He kept reminding himself to think strategically, to use his words, his body language, and his presence to navigate the situation safely. He remained polite, respectful, but internally he was already planning his next steps carefully, aware that one wrong move could change everything. As the sun dipped lower, shadows grew longer across the street. The officer shifted his weight, still watching every movement while the man remained steadfast. The neighborhood was quiet, almost as if holding its breath along with him. He realized that sometimes ordinary days could turn extraordinary in an instant, and that courage often meant controlling fear and thinking clearly under pressure. The man kept his hands raised, his movements slow and deliberate. He continued speaking calmly, making sure his tone conveyed respect and non-threatening intent. "I want to get home safely, officer. Please tell me what you need me to do next." He hoped that reason would guide the officer, that professionalism would prevail over bias or anger. Minutes stretched on, and the man remained focused, his mind balancing fear with strategy, caution with courage. Every passing second was a test of patience and composure, a challenge to remain human and rational in the face of an unexpected threat. The man knew that how he reacted could determine the outcome of this encounter, and he resolved to do everything he could to navigate it safely, with calm and dignity. And so, standing on the side of the road with the officer watching him closely, the man waited. He waited with patience, with awareness, and with a quiet determination that, no matter what happened next, he would not give in to panic or anger. He would face the moment with presence of mind, trusting that clear thinking and steady action were his strongest tools. The evening air carried on, the sun lowering in the sky, and the quiet suburban street became the setting for a test of courage, restraint, and human composure. The man stood on the side of the road, hands raised, feeling the tension pressing down on him like a heavy weight. Every second seemed to stretch endlessly, and he could hear the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The officer kept his gun trained on him, eyes sharp and unblinking. The man's mind raced. He needed to think, to plan his next move carefully without making the officer angry or suspicious. He took a slow breath and tried to calm himself, forcing his thoughts into focus. He remembered stories he had read about people in dangerous situations, and how staying calm could be the difference between safety and disaster. He knew he had to make every word count, every movement visible, every action deliberate. He decided to use what he had at his disposal, his phone. Slowly he reached for it with his hands clearly in view. The officer's eyes followed, narrowing, but he didn't shout or move. The man's heart pounded in his chest as he dialed a number he rarely thought he would need to use. Instead of calling a friend or family member, he asked for someone who could help him immediately and officially, someone with authority. His fingers typed in the number carefully. Then he held the phone steadily, speaking clearly when someone answered. He explained the situation, his voice calm but firm, giving details of his location, the officer's behavior, and the visible gun. He did not panic, he did not exaggerate. He spoke factually, making sure the person on the other end understood that this was serious. The officer noticed the call and his expression changed slightly. He stepped closer, confused and wary. The man continued speaking, carefully explaining that he was not a threat, that he wanted to comply, but that the situation was dangerous. He stayed polite and respectful, using words to show that he was rational and careful. Every gesture was slow and deliberate, his hands never leaving view. His eyes focused on the officer. The voice on the other end of the line spoke calmly but firmly, asking for more information and instructing the man to remain in place. The officer seemed to realize that this was no ordinary stop. His posture stiffened, his jaw tight. He was clearly not expecting a call to a high authority during a routine traffic stop. The man spoke confidently, describing everything without fear, making it clear that he was in control of his actions. Minutes passed with the man calmly explaining the situation and the officer becoming more cautious. The officer's movement slowed and he began to realize that any sudden action could have consequences. The man's calm, measured approach was slowly taking the tension out of the moment. He spoke slowly, asking the officer questions that were not confrontational but made him think about what he was doing. The officer's grip on his gun relaxed slightly, his eyes scanning the road but clearly wary of the phone call. The man continued speaking to the authority on the line, making sure that every fact was accurate, every detail included. He described the location, the officer's movements, his own compliance, and the fact that he was unarmed. The authority on the phone reassured him that help was on the way and instructed him to remain calm. The man felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. He was relieved that someone was officially aware of the situation and could intervene if needed, but the anxiety remained because he was still facing a gun and an unpredictable officer. He took another deep breath and continued to speak calmly, hoping to show the officer that he was reasonable and careful. He asked questions about the officer's instructions, confirming every step to make sure there were no misunderstandings. The officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes never leaving the man. He seemed unsure, cautious. The man took a slow, measured step back, making sure it was visible and deliberate. He wanted to create a small distance to show he was not a threat, while still following the officer's commands. The officer nodded slightly as if acknowledging the movement, but did not relax entirely. The man continued his conversation with the authority on the phone, describing each movement of the officer, each command, and each instruction he was following. His voice remained calm, steady, and polite. He asked about the next steps, seeking guidance on how to remain safe. The authority responded clearly, advising him to remain still, keep his hands visible, and continue to speak in a calm manner. The officer's confusion grew. He had never encountered someone handling a traffic stop this way. The man was polite, calm, and methodical, which contrasted sharply with the aggression he had expected to control the situation. The officer's eyes flickered, showing a hint of uncertainty, as if realizing that the man's composure made any rash move risky. The man decided to use the opportunity to further humanize himself. He spoke about mundane things, the quiet of the neighborhood, the evening light, even small observations about the environment. His goal was not to annoy or distract the officer, but to remind him subtly that he was facing a real human being, someone with thoughts and feelings, not just a supposed threat. The officer seemed to relax just a fraction, though the gun remained ready. Time seemed to stretch. The man noticed other drivers slowing down as they passed, curious but careful. He remained focused on the officer and the phone call. He continued to provide clear, accurate information to the authority, ensuring that anyone listening would understand that he was acting responsibly and cautiously. Each word was chosen to reduce risk and keep the situation under control. The officer shifted again, clearly debating internally how to handle the unusual situation. The man could sense hesitation, a crack in the officer's confidence. He continued to speak calmly, asking questions that emphasized his willingness to comply, while also subtly reinforcing that any aggressive move could have consequences. He maintained eye contact with the officer, hands clearly visible, every gesture measured. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The authority on the phone confirmed that additional support was on the way, but instructed the man to continue his calm approach. The man followed the instructions meticulously, moving slowly when necessary, speaking politely and keeping his hands in view. He made sure that every movement communicated cooperation and awareness. The officer's expressions shifted further. Confusion, caution, and a growing realization were visible. The man remained calm, confident in his approach. He realized that he had successfully taken control of the situation, not through aggression or confrontation, but through composure, clear communication, and strategic thinking. He spoke slowly, asking questions, confirming instructions, and showing that he was rational and careful. The tension in the air was still thick, but the dynamic had changed. The officer no longer acted purely aggressively. He was wary, cautious, thinking about the consequences of each action. The man's calm, methodical approach had altered the balance of power, not through force but through strategy and courage. The man continued to explain every detail to the authority on the phone, ensuring that help could act if necessary. He described the officer's movements, his own compliance, and the surrounding environment. His voice remained calm, steady, and clear. He asked for guidance on what to do next, following every instruction to maintain safety. The officer's movements slowed further. He kept his gun ready but was clearly unsure how to proceed. The man noticed this and maintained his calm, steady approach. He continued to speak to both the officer and the authority on the phone, creating a situation where any rash move by the officer could have clear consequences. His presence of mind and rational behavior were now his strongest assets. As the sun dipped further, the street lights began to glow softly, casting a warm light over the scene. The man remained calm, methodical, and deliberate. Every word, every movement, every gesture was aimed at ensuring safety. The officer's demeanor had shifted from aggressive to cautious, showing that the man's strategy was working. He knew that patience, calm, and clarity were key. Eventually, the officer's posture softened slightly. He lowered his gun just a fraction, signaling the first real sign of change. The man remained steady, hands still visible, speaking calmly to the authority on the phone. He described the shift in the officer's demeanor, ensuring that the situation was continuously monitored and that help could respond if necessary. The man realized that his actions had transformed a potentially dangerous situation into a manageable one. By staying calm, thinking clearly, and using available resources strategically, he had maintained control and safety. He continued to follow instructions, speak politely, and make every movement deliberate, knowing that this approach would guide the encounter toward resolution. Even as tension lingered, the man remained composed, aware that patience and rational behavior were his greatest allies. The officer watched him closely, a mix of confusion, caution, and realization in his eyes. The man knew that his strategy had worked. Through calm, careful human actions, he had taken the first critical steps toward a safe outcome. The man could feel the evening air settling around him, a quiet calm that contrasted sharply with the tension he had felt only moments before. Yet he knew that nothing was truly safe until the officer lowered his weapon completely, and the situation was officially resolved. His mind stayed sharp, analyzing every twitch, every glance, and every movement the officer made. He had learned that in moments like this, awareness was not just important, it was life-saving. The officer seemed to hesitate, uncertainty flickering across his face. His hands remained close to his holster, but he no longer advanced aggressively. The man continued speaking to the authority on the phone, his voice calm, steady, and precise. He described the officer's hesitation, the slight change in posture, and the minor steps he had taken backward. He wanted anyone listening to know exactly what was happening, so that if anything went wrong, the situation could be documented and addressed quickly. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care, not to provoke or criticize, but to narrate what was happening in real time. He emphasized that he was compliant, patient, and careful. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply stated the facts, knowing that clarity could be a powerful tool. The officer's attention seemed split between him and the phone, and for the first time he appeared uncertain how to act. The man realized that this was a delicate moment. He needed to maintain the calm he had established and encourage the officer to do the same. He took a slow breath and said quietly but clearly, "I want to follow your instructions, officer. Please tell me what I should do next." His tone was respectful, showing that he was cooperative and aware of the seriousness of the situation. The officer's eyes flicked toward the road and back to the man. The tension between them hung thick in the air. The man's calmness seemed to make the officer pause and reconsider every move. It was as if the officer was realizing that the man was not just another person to control. He was thinking, aware, and capable of taking careful action if necessary. This subtle shift changed the dynamic entirely. The man continued to narrate, describing the environment, the officer's movements, and his own compliance. He mentioned small details like the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of a passing car. These details were not distractions. They were reminders that this was a human moment, grounded in reality, not a confrontation or a threat. He wanted the officer to see the world as it was, and not through a lens of fear or bias. Time moved slowly, but the man remained composed. He spoke politely to the officer, confirming instructions, clarifying commands, and responding calmly to any questions. The officer seemed to relax just slightly, as he realized that the man's actions were deliberate, careful, and fully cooperative. Every step the man took was measured, every word chosen with precision. The phone call continued, and the man explained every nuance of the situation. He described the officer's body language, tone of voice, and slight shifts in movement. The person on the line acknowledged him, reassuring him that help was monitoring the situation and would be ready to intervene if needed. This knowledge gave him a quiet confidence, though he remained vigilant, aware that danger could arise at any moment. The officer began to speak, asking questions that suggested uncertainty. His tone was no longer purely commanding. It had a slight hesitation. The man responded carefully, making sure that his words were respectful and non-confrontational. He repeated facts clearly, confirmed his own compliance, and reassured the officer that he was not a threat. The small change in tone from the officer felt like a victory, a subtle sign that reason was beginning to take hold. The man continued to narrate the situation, emphasizing that he was calm, composed, and aware of every movement. He spoke slowly, making sure to include small observations like the soft hum of passing cars and the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance. These details were intentional. They humanized the moment and reminded the officer that he was dealing with a real person, not just a scenario to control. The officer's posture softened further, and for the first time he seemed uncertain whether to advance or maintain distance. The man noticed this immediately. He stayed still, hands clearly visible, speaking politely but firmly. He continued to describe everything, including his own slow, deliberate movements, ensuring that the officer and anyone listening could understand that he was compliant and cautious. Minutes passed, but the man did not rush. He had learned that patience was crucial. Every hasty action could create danger. He continued to speak to the authority on the phone, providing updates, confirming instructions, and seeking guidance. His voice remained calm, clear, and human, emphasizing both his compliance and his awareness of the seriousness of the situation. The officer's hand twitched near his holster, then relaxed slightly. He seemed to be processing the situation, realizing that any aggressive move could escalate things dangerously. The man stayed composed, aware that his calmness was influencing the officer. He continued to speak politely, confirming steps and following instructions meticulously. His movements were deliberate, slow, and visible, reinforcing the message that he posed no threat. The man realized that this moment was a turning point. The officer was beginning to see him not as a threat, but as a cautious, aware, and rational person. The man's calm, human approach had created a space where reason could take over fear and aggression. He continued to narrate every detail, making sure that his own safety remained a priority while also guiding the officer toward a more controlled response. He spoke softly, describing the small changes in the officer's behavior, the subtle shifts in posture, and the slight relaxation in his stance. Every observation was a reminder that awareness, calm, and patience were powerful tools. The man's voice remained steady, human, and clear, showing that he was not just compliant but thoughtful and strategic. The officer began to lower his weapon, very slowly, as if testing the waters. The man stayed still, hands raised, maintaining eye contact and speaking calmly. He described the change, making sure the authority on the phone was aware. His careful narration ensured that the situation was documented and that help could respond if needed. He remained aware, cautious, and composed, balancing relief with vigilance. The man continued to use his words to guide the officer. He asked polite questions, confirmed commands, and emphasized his compliance. The officer's movements became slower and less aggressive. The man noticed a subtle shift in the air, a small decrease in tension. He did not rush, knowing that patience and careful observation were still essential. The phone call ended with confirmation that additional support was nearby and monitoring the situation. The man thanked the authority, remaining calm, polite, and composed. He knew that the presence of oversight would help ensure safety, but he remained alert, understanding that the situation was still delicate. Every gesture, every word, and every breath remained deliberate. The officer's body language showed further hesitation, as if he were reconsidering his next move. The man spoke softly, gently reinforcing that he wanted to comply, that he posed no threat, and that he was aware of every step. He described the world around them, emphasizing human details, grounding the moment in reality. The officer's gaze wavered, uncertainty showing through the rigid exterior. Minutes felt like hours, but the man remained focused, aware, and patient. He knew that composure and human understanding were his best tools. He spoke gently, asking for instructions, confirming movements, and describing his actions. The officer watched him, slowly realizing that aggression would not solve anything and that careful observation, patience, and communication were safer approaches. The man remained calm, aware of the delicate balance. His actions had shifted the dynamic, turning a potentially violent encounter into a situation guided by rational thought, strategy, and careful communication. He spoke politely, narrating every step, making sure the officer understood his intentions and actions. Each word was deliberate, human, and clear. As the evening deepened, shadows lengthened, and the streetlights cast soft illumination on the scene. The man stayed composed, maintaining patience, calm, and awareness. The officer's posture continued to relax, though he remained cautious. The man knew that the key was to maintain control of his own actions, to speak clearly, and to keep every movement deliberate and visible. Finally, the officer's gun was lowered almost completely. The man remained still, hands raised, speaking gently, emphasizing his cooperation and awareness. He continued to narrate the situation, describing the environment, the officer's actions, and his own movements. He had successfully used calm, patience, and human-centric communication to guide the encounter toward safety. The man realized that moments like these were tests of courage, patience, and strategy. By remaining calm, observant, and deliberate, he had shifted the balance from potential danger to cautious cooperation. He stayed alert, aware, and human, understanding that every action and word mattered. He had changed the course of the encounter, using nothing but clear thinking, careful action, and steady communication. The man could feel the tension in the air slowly changing. The officer's grip on his gun was no longer tight, and his stance had softened slightly. The man knew he was not completely safe yet, but the shift in behavior was encouraging. He kept his hands raised, his movements slow and deliberate, and his voice calm. Every word he spoke was measured, designed to maintain the fragile peace he had created. He continued speaking to the authority on the phone, giving updates about the officer's behavior and the surrounding environment. He mentioned the subtle relaxation in the officer's posture, the small steps backward, and the slight lowering of the gun. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened, the situation was documented in real time. The voice on the line reassured him, instructing him to continue being calm, polite, and compliant. This reassured him, giving him a quiet confidence that he could navigate the remaining tension safely. The officer's expression showed a mix of confusion and caution. He seemed to be processing the situation, understanding for the first time that the man was not a threat but a rational, aware individual. The man realized that the officer was thinking carefully about every move, aware that any aggressive action could lead to consequences. He continued speaking gently, confirming his compliance and asking for instructions, making it clear that he wanted to cooperate fully. Slowly, The officer took another step back. The man remained still, hands visible, and spoke calmly. He narrated each small movement to the authority on the phone, explaining what the officer was doing and how he was responding. He also spoke to the officer, politely asking what he should do next and showing that he was willing to follow instructions without hesitation. His calmness seemed to have a steadying effect, helping to de-escalate the situation further. The street around them was quiet, with only a few cars passing by. The fading sunlight painted the neighborhood in warm colors, and the man noted these details quietly, hoping to bring a sense of normalcy to the tense moment. He spoke softly, mentioning the changing light, the quiet rustle of leaves, and the distant sounds of life in the neighborhood. These observations were subtle but important, grounding the situation in reality and reminding the officer that this was a human interaction, not a confrontation waiting to explode. The officer's gaze flicked toward the street and then back to the man. He lowered his gun a little more, though still keeping it ready, and asked a question in a slightly softer tone. The man responded calmly, clearly stating that he wanted to cooperate and remain safe. He did not argue or raise his voice. He simply answered truthfully and politely, reinforcing the message that he was not a threat. Each answer, each movement, and each word was carefully chosen to maintain the calm he had worked so hard to create. The authority on the phone continued to provide guidance, advising the man to stay where he was, keep his hands visible, and continue speaking calmly. He followed these instructions meticulously, knowing that staying composed and human was his best strategy. He spoke politely to the officer, confirming actions and clarifying movements, making sure that every step was deliberate and visible. Time passed slowly, and the tension eased little by little. The officer's body language changed gradually. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed, and his eyes no longer darted around as sharply. The man noticed these changes and continued to narrate them carefully, both to the authority on the phone and to the officer. He emphasized his own compliance and patience, making it clear that he was aware, respectful, and cautious. The officer finally lowered his weapon completely, keeping it holstered but within reach. The man's hands remained visible, still raised slightly as a sign of cooperation. He continued to speak calmly, asking what the next steps were and confirming his willingness to comply. The officer seemed to relax further, realizing that the man was not a threat, and that any aggressive move could now be unnecessary and counterproductive. The man continued to describe the situation to the authority on the phone, noting the officer's behavior and his own compliance. He explained that the officer had lowered the weapon, that the tension in the air had decreased, and that he was following every instruction carefully. He also described the quietness of the street, the fading sunlight, and the sense of normalcy slowly returning to the neighborhood. His narration was clear, calm, and human, emphasizing patience, awareness, and composure. The officer spoke again, this time more calmly, asking routine questions about the man's identity, purpose, and actions. The man answered politely, clearly, and without hesitation. He maintained eye contact, kept his hands visible, and made no sudden movements. Every word, gesture, and action was deliberate, reinforcing the message that he was cooperative and rational. The officer listened, processing each response carefully, and the tension that had dominated the encounter earlier seemed to dissipate further. The man realized that his approach, patience, calm and careful communication, had worked. He had guided the encounter from a potentially dangerous confrontation to a controlled, cooperative interaction. He remained aware, knowing that the situation was not entirely over, but he allowed himself a quiet sense of relief. The officer's behavior had shifted noticeably, and the man could sense that reason was now guiding the officer more than fear or bias. He continued to speak gently, narrating his actions and confirming instructions. He asked polite questions, ensuring that he followed all commands precisely. The officer seemed to appreciate the clarity and patience, his posture becoming more relaxed. The man noticed the subtle human connection forming, a recognition that this was not a power struggle but a shared moment where careful communication and understanding mattered. The authority on the phone confirmed that support was nearby and monitoring the situation. The man expressed gratitude but remained cautious, aware that he still needed to maintain awareness and composure. He continued to narrate everything carefully, reinforcing that he was cooperative, rational, and cautious. His calm human presence had altered the dynamics of the encounter, and he was careful to sustain that effect until full resolution. The officer finally took a step back and gestured for the man to move to a safer spot. The man complied slowly, hands visible, speaking softly to confirm that he was following instructions. He moved deliberately, making sure that each motion was clear and visible. The officer's behavior was now fully cooperative, a stark contrast to the aggression from earlier in the encounter. The man maintained calm and awareness, ensuring that the peace he had achieved remained intact. As the sun set completely, the streetlights illuminated the neighborhood softly. The man remained patient, calm, and composed, understanding that the encounter was nearing resolution but still requiring care. He continued to speak clearly, narrating movements, confirming compliance, and maintaining a respectful tone. The officer seemed to mirror his composure, no longer aggressive and fully attentive to the instructions and environment. The man felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, realizing that staying human, aware, and deliberate had guided the encounter towards safety. He continued to follow instructions carefully, narrating actions, confirming movements, and maintaining visible compliance. The officer had completely lowered the weapon and was now watching with a measured, controlled approach. The man remained vigilant but confident that the strategy of calm communication had been effective. Finally, the officer gestured for the man to step back toward his vehicle. He complied, moving slowly, hands raised and clearly visible. The officer's demeanor had shifted from aggression to cautious professionalism. The man continued to speak softly, confirming every action and maintaining a polite human tone. The tension that had dominated the encounter earlier was gone, replaced by a careful, controlled resolution. The man's patience, awareness, and calm had transformed the situation. By staying human, clear, and deliberate, he had guided the encounter from a dangerous confrontation to a safe, controlled interaction. He continued to narrate, ensuring that the authority on the phone had full understanding of the situation and that the officer remained fully aware of his compliance. Every gesture, word, and breath reinforced safety, human connection, and careful control. As the encounter drew to a close, the officer finally lowered his gaze, holstered the weapon, and nodded toward the man. He spoke calmly, providing final instructions. The man followed them carefully, moving slowly, hands visible, and continuing to speak politely. The situation was now fully under control, the danger dissipated, and the man had successfully navigated a potentially life-threatening encounter with patience, awareness, and human-centered composure. The street was quiet now, with the gentle glow of streetlights illuminating the pavement. The man took a slow, steadying breath, knowing that the encounter was nearly over but remaining cautious. He kept his hands visible, moving deliberately as he followed the officer's instructions. The tension that had dominated the last hour had softened, replaced by a controlled atmosphere where careful communication and awareness guided every action. The officer finally spoke in a calm, measured tone. He provided clear instructions for the man to step back to his vehicle and remain there while the situation was documented. The man followed carefully, ensuring every movement was visible and deliberate. His voice remained polite and human as he acknowledged the instructions, emphasizing his cooperation and understanding. The authority on the phone remained on the line, monitoring the situation and providing guidance. The man described each step he took, from approaching his vehicle to opening the door carefully. He narrated the officer's actions, noting the lowered weapon and more relaxed posture. Every word, every gesture, every breath was meant to maintain calm and ensure safety until the encounter was fully resolved. As he settled back into the driver's seat, the man reflected quietly on what had just happened. The fear he had felt earlier had been replaced by a sense of relief, but he remained aware that the situation had been serious. He thought about how his calm, deliberate actions and clear communication had helped de-escalate a potentially dangerous encounter. Patience, awareness, and strategy had been his greatest tools. The officer remained nearby, maintaining a professional distance. He continued to watch the man carefully, confirming identity and details without aggression. The man spoke politely, answering questions clearly and calmly. He described his actions and movements carefully, making sure the officer and the monitoring authority had a full understanding of his compliance. The officer seemed to be processing the encounter, recognizing that the man had handled the situation thoughtfully and safely. The street had grown quieter, the neighborhood settling into the evening rhythm. The man took a moment to notice the ordinary beauty around him, the soft glow of lights on lawns, the distant hum of cars passing, the occasional bark of a dog. These details grounded him in reality, reminding him that life continued even after moments of fear and uncertainty. He used these observations to maintain a calm human presence, reinforcing to the officer that he posed no threat. The officer asked a few more routine questions, and the man responded with clarity and politeness. He confirmed his compliance, emphasized his awareness, and maintained steady eye contact. Each interaction reinforced the idea that he was rational, cooperative, and aware of the seriousness of the situation. The officer's posture continued to relax, signaling a shift from caution to controlled professionalism. The authority on the phone confirmed that the situation had been stabilized and that support personnel were on their way for final verification. The man thanked the operator, his voice calm and polite, then continued to narrate his movements and compliance. He kept his hands visible, moved slowly, and followed every instruction carefully. The officer observed each action, noting the consistent cooperation and calmness. Minutes passed as the final steps were taken. The man remained vigilant, aware that safety required constant attention until fully cleared. He followed the officer's instructions to close the vehicle door slowly, remove his hands from view only when permitted, and remain seated. Each movement was deliberate, reinforcing the message of cooperation and awareness. The officer finally gave a signal indicating that the immediate danger had passed. The man exhaled quietly, relief washing over him, but he maintained composure. Understanding that vigilance remained important, he spoke politely, thanking the officer and acknowledging the instructions. His tone was human, respectful, and calm, reinforcing the positive resolution. As the encounter came to its official conclusion, the man reflected on the experience. He realized that fear, strategy, and human awareness had guided him safely through a potentially life-threatening situation. His calm, deliberate actions had helped to de-escalate aggression, transform tension into cautious cooperation, and ensure a safe outcome. He felt a quiet pride in his composure and careful thinking, knowing that these qualities had made a difference. The officer finally stepped back fully, holstered his weapon, and nodded toward the man. His posture indicated acknowledgement and respect for the careful way the man had handled the situation. The man responded with a polite nod, maintaining a respectful human connection that had been established through patience and calm communication. The encounter, which had begun with fear and tension, now ended with controlled resolution and understanding. The man started the vehicle and slowly drove forward, following the officer's instructions to safely exit the area. He maintained awareness, watching the road, the surroundings, and the officer's position. He moved deliberately, ensuring that every action was visible and safe. The tension that had defined the encounter was replaced by a careful, attentive calm as he continued home. As he drove, he reflected on the power of patience, human awareness, and strategic communication. He realized that composure in moments of danger could influence outcomes more than force, confrontation, or aggression. His thoughts lingered on the small choices he had made, speaking clearly, narrating actions, maintaining visible hands, and following instructions carefully. Each had contributed to the safe resolution of a serious encounter. Arriving home, he parked carefully and took a moment to breathe, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The fear he had experienced earlier had transformed into reflection, gratitude, and recognition of his own composure. He knew that staying calm, aware, and human-centered had been essential in navigating a complex and potentially dangerous situation. He walked into his home quietly, taking time to absorb the ordinary comfort of everyday life. The encounter on the street had been extraordinary, but it reinforced the importance of awareness, patience, and careful action. He felt a renewed appreciation for human resilience and the power of staying calm and deliberate under pressure. Later, he reflected on the encounter and considered sharing his experience to help others understand the importance of strategic calm in tense situations. He thought about how awareness, patience, and clear communication could de-escalate conflict, protect oneself, and foster understanding. He realized that ordinary human qualities, when applied thoughtfully, could make a difference in extraordinary circumstances. The encounter also left an impact on the officer, who had witnessed the man's composed and deliberate approach. It was a moment that likely prompted reflection on professional conduct, awareness, and the consequences of actions during high-pressure situations. The man had modeled calm, respectful, and human behavior, demonstrating the effect of patience and strategic communication. The story of the encounter became a quiet lesson in courage, awareness, and human-centered thinking. The man's actions were a testament to the power of staying calm, thinking clearly, and acting deliberately in the face of fear. His approach had ensured safety, guided the encounter toward resolution, and highlighted the importance of human connection even in moments of tension. In the end, the man returned to his routine, carrying with him the lessons learned from the street. He knew that courage was not always loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, deliberate, and human. He felt empowered by his ability to navigate danger thoughtfully and safely, understanding that patience, awareness, and calm could transform fear into control, tension into cooperation, and danger into safety. The neighborhood settled into the evening, the streetlights casting soft glows, the occasional sound of a distant car or dog providing a gentle reminder of life continuing. The man reflected on the extraordinary moment, recognizing how ordinary human qualities had guided him through an extraordinary situation. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that staying calm, aware, and human had made all the difference. The encounter remained a significant memory, one that reinforced the importance of composure, careful thought, and human awareness. The man understood that these qualities could protect not only himself but others, and that moments of tension could be navigated successfully with patience, clear communication, and human understanding. The experience left him with a deeper sense of confidence, resilience, and appreciation for the power of staying calm and deliberate in the face of uncertainty.